The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is paused. What this means if you were scheduled to get it or if you already have. Plus, President Biden sets a date for withdrawing all U.S. troops from Afghanistan, and Netflix doubles down on one of its biggest hits. Wednesday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Wednesday, April 14th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Good morning.
Hey, Wags, did you, I forgot to ask you, did you get your PCR test back?
I got I'm at work. I'm in the office.
Okay. I hope so.
And I wasn't getting tested, just my daughter was. And knock on wood, she does not have COVID, but she's got a cold or something's going on.
Oh. When it's a little kid, do they do the brain tickler? Or is it a different process?
They do. And it's, I mean, if you think you react poorly to it, to try sticking that into the nose of a 2.5-year-old, it's not pretty.
Oh, that poor girl. Okay, well, I'm glad that she's at least not too sick.
Knock on wood. Okay. All right, Carlo, let's get to the news here. The CDC's advisory committee is meeting today to deliberate over the handful of rare blood clots reported in people who received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. About a minute after we wrapped this podcast yesterday, the FDA and the CDC put out a joint statement calling for a pause on administering that vaccine while the clots are investigated. And many states have temporarily stopped giving those shots in response. 6 women between the ages of 18 and 48 developed this clotting disorder 1 to 3 weeks after they were vaccinated. 1 died, another's hospitalized. The Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine has been given to about 7 million Americans. So statistically here, it's like 1 in a million, even less than that.
Yeah. So I think I predicted this a week or two ago because it was sort of only a matter of time, just because Johnson & Johnson and Astra they use the same vaccine technology. So it seemed like this was sort of a foregone conclusion. It's just, it's upsetting. I feel like we don't understand risk analysis or cost benefit analysis in this country. I mean, that's like you said, 1 in a million risk of these blood clots. That's the same death rate from smallpox, by the way, when we mandated that vaccine in this country. I think I've said this in the past. If you're on birth control, there's about 1 in 1,000 risk of developing these blood clots, and that is considered to be a low side effect. So I think this is going to go down as another one of these disastrous examples in a now growing list of public health messaging failures in this pandemic. We've already heard from people from this podcast, listeners of this podcast, I should say, who have talked about how this news hit like a bombshell among people who were on the fence about getting vaccinated, which was exactly what my fear was going to be when this news dropped. So I think, I hate to say it, but I think we could probably kiss herd immunity goodbye in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I was mentioned my family friend who is vaccine hesitant before, and I haven't spoken to him yet, but I could just picture him. This is the nail in the coffin. I'm going to try to call him today if I can bear it, but I'm sure that he's going to say, look, even though he's not even in the demographic that this is even affecting, right? It's younger women in Europe. We saw with the AstraZeneca. That's why they were pausing. They were recommending that just women under the age of 55 not get that AstraZeneca vaccine in some cases. So from what I understand, the reason that the CDC and the FDA took the extraordinary move of actually pausing administering the vaccine is because the way that you treat these blood clots that are developed, that may or may not be developing, but from the vaccine, but in the way you treat this type of blood clot is different than how you would treat a normal blood clot. So there's a medicine that you would typically give someone who developed a blood clot. It could have a very bad effect if you give it, because what's happening here is it's like a combination of 2 things if it's actually an immune response. And so that's, I think they're doing the pause to give doctors, I think, as much information on how to treat this very rare condition. But I agree with you. I mean, I think this just adds to the skepticism. the CDC and the FDA is saying, look, this shows we're doing everything right and we're taking
Yeah.
everything seriously and we're looking at the data. But unfortunately, I feel like it's probably going to add to some hesitancy here.
Yeah, I mean, that's Jill. That's the real world is not like they say that, and they're right. I mean, to a degree, right? But like, that's not how information operates in the modern world, right? People see the headline, they don't read the story, they don't read that it's 1 in 6 people out of 7 million. They just read the headline, and then even when this thing is unpaused, which I'm sure it will be eventually, that will get a tenth of the coverage that this got, right? So the die has been cast.
All right, so what do you do if you are scheduled to get this vaccine? Depending on where you live, if you have an appointment scheduled to receive the J&J vaccine, it may either be rescheduled or you'll get a different vaccine. Health officials are urging people not to cancel their appointments. And if you've received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine already, officials say you can watch for the following rare symptoms: increased shortness of breath, abdominal or leg pain that doesn't go away, a headache that doesn't go away. And if you are experiencing these symptoms, call your doctor. But if you're out of that, if it's already been 3 weeks, you're kind of out of the window here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, this is my plan since nobody asked. This week, man, this week is just taking it out of me. So I'm going to get my second shot in 2 weeks. I'll wait another 2 weeks for the immunity to kick in, and then I'm done. I'm done with COVID. Personally speaking, I mean, I'll still cover it because that's my job, but I'm done with this pandemic. I'll carry a mask around and I'll wear it where masks are mandated for as long as they are. I mean, I'm not going to be one of those people, but I'm getting on with my life here. Okay, like life is too short as it is, so that's where I'm at. And I'll probably get grief for that. But I think what's going to happen here is COVID's going to go endemic. It'll flare up. Maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe just in the winters, who knows. But it'll flare up. Hopefully by next fall, they're giving us sort of like a flu COVID cocktail vaccine, and we're not really thinking too much about it. Maybe 100,000, maybe 200,000 people will die from this every year. It'll be like a bad flu every winter. That's if we're lucky. If we're unlucky, there will be a new mutation that breaks through the vaccines, and we're back to square one. I think the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna are going to be really helpful there because they're so easy to tinker with. But it's going to just be this constant battle between like a new variant and a new vaccine. That's sort of the worst case scenario, I think. But I'm not going to think in those terms because it's really not it's not healthy. Like, it's not mentally healthy for me or for anybody. I'm not going to shame people who don't want to get vaccinated. All it does is cause grief. So do your thing. I mean, Tucker Carlson last night, the #1 show on cable news. I don't know how many people watched, 4 or 5 million. He did a segment about how the vaccines aren't working and the government is trying to cover that up. So, I mean, that's how do you compete with that, right? That's where we're at. I'm Sisyphus over here with the rock. I don't know what else to say.
And it's crazy because the numbers are just not bare. I don't know how Tucker Carlson is getting away with that. In Israel, for example, serious COVID cases have fallen below 300 for the first time since early December, and 0.5% of tests came back positive there, which is the lowest rate in almost a year. So, the proof here is in the pudding. The vaccines work. I'm not on your page where I'm going to go about life as normal once I'm fully vaccinated. Like, I'm still going to take it seriously. And it's funny, we're debating here at Cheddar, right? Not debating, like it's not up to us, but we're opening the office and people are going to start coming back relatively soon. Even fully vaccinated, I'm not going to lie, that makes me somewhat nervous as somebody who sits without a mask on. I can't wear a mask for work. So,
right.
I don't know. Like, I don't know how I feel, right? I feel a sense of unease despite the fact that I'm going to be fully vaccinated soon. Like, I still feel nervous about COVID. I'm not like what you're saying in terms of your approach where it's like it's yesterday's news. I don't feel that way because I do I feel like if I got COVID, I wouldn't have a serious case, but I could give it to my daughter who, I'm curious what you think when your baby's born and you could potentially risk, like, you and Becky who are going to want to go to brunch. You think you're going to want to take your baby there, not knowing it, like you think it's just life is normal once you're vaccinated. Like, you're responsible for another life, and that person's not going to be vaccinated.
A fair point, but but you can't you're not transmitting the virus if you're vaccinated. So in addition to not getting it, or definitely not getting a serious case, I wouldn't be at risk of transmitting it to somebody. So I think, yes, life does go back to normal once you're vaccinated, and I totally take your point. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm just going to become sort of like an anti-masker or something like after this, but I do think that people need to understand that the vaccines are the way out, and when you get vaccinated, there is going to be a sense of normalcy to your life again. I mean, that's the whole point of this. I mean, I see people out there in Brooklyn walking down the street on an empty street by themselves, wearing a mask. Like, you don't have to do that. Like, I understand that a lot of it is like virtue signaling, and it's more of this like social construct, if you will. And I'm not against that. I'm just trying to say that, yes, I think that once I'm vaccinated and once Becky's vaccinated, that our lives are going to become significantly more normal.
I mean, I definitely agree with that. I'm just more making the point that until this pandemic is under control, I don't think that just being vaccinated is like, I think we really are all in this together. So I think just individually being vaccinated, especially when somebody in your family is not vaccinated because they can't be, it's just a lot more complicated. Anyway,
sure.
Well, hopefully we'll all be doing brunch together in a few months, Carlo.
One day.
Okay, on to some other news. President Biden will be announcing today that he is pulling all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan by September 11th, 20 years since the attacks that launched this country's longest war. The exit not expected to be conditional, meaning that the American mission in Afghanistan will end regardless of the security situation on the ground. The announcement's going to keep troops past that May 1st deadline that's been negotiated with the Taliban, which the Taliban's opposed, but not much longer. Carlo, this is big.
Well, it's potentially big, that's for sure. I think file this under believe it when you see it, because we've heard this before, but it certainly has the potential to be a big deal. It would be even better if he just did it today. Why wait, right? There's some opposition to this among some Republicans and even some Democrats in Washington, but not really all that much, to be honest, which I think shows you how pretty much nobody wants us there anymore. The argument from those folks, people like Mitch McConnell, is more or less, Afghanistan will fall under the control of the Taliban again once we leave, which is kind of ridiculous because it already has. The Taliban is more powerful now than it has been probably in the last 20 years, that, it will be a disaster for Afghani women, which it will be. It already is. That it will become a safe haven for terrorists again. That's, of course, certainly possible. But none of that suggests that having American boots on the ground there does anything to keep those things from already happening.
Just a note, 2,400 U.S. troops have died in Afghanistan. A good time to keep them in your thoughts. And
we spent $2 trillion on this war.
And something else that struck me, and I've been trying to read a lot of the analysis about this from all different sides, and somebody said, they're like, you know what, the war in Afghanistan continues. We're just not going to be playing a direct role in it, which is quite true. I mean, this country is still going to essentially be at war, in some form of war.
Sure.
And as we think 20 years since the attacks on September 11th, it's wow. It's incredible. It's like it's hard to even think about.
I didn't even realize until yesterday, actually, that this 9/11 is 20 years. That is really remarkable.
Okay, to Minnesota, the officer who shot Daunte Wright has resigned from the Brooklyn Center police force, as has the police chief, in an attempt to de-escalate the tensions in the Minneapolis suburb where Wright was killed. Protests continued outside the heavily fortified police HQ for a third night, but dissipated after police declared the gathering unlawful and then dispersed the crowd. Wright's mother spoke to supporters again, talking about how she was on the phone with her son in his last moments. He'd told her that he was being stopped for something to do with air fresheners, so she told him to take them down and to let her speak to the officer. I'm laughing just because it's like you can relate to that kind of as a parent, I think. Like, put me on with that officer.
Well, yeah, and she was talking about how he was really afraid of the police, and she could hear in his voice that he was really nervous to be stopped. I mean, look, I am a blonde, blue-eyed white guy, and I get nervous when I'm stopped by the police. It's a nerve-wracking experience. So I can only imagine how much more it is if you're a young black man in this country. Something I learned yesterday, by the way, on this story, none of the officers in that town in Brooklyn Center actually lived there, which I think just speaks to something, sort of this larger issue when we talk about police reform in this country. You know, if you're a cop, you should really live in the place that you're policing. It seems like that's a no-brainer to me. Just otherwise, you really get into this place where it feels like there's this occupying force, especially for black and brown men in particular. By the way, Wright actually had a connection to George Floyd. Floyd's girlfriend was Wright's former teacher, which just shows you sort of like this, how tight-knit this community is, and what it's been dealing with this last year.
I thought that was incredible. I heard
right?
that all. Yeah, I that really stayed with me also.
Yeah, remarkable. Speaking of, just on the Chauvin news, that his defense team began its case yesterday, a few miles away from where this situation happened. They started their case by sort of shifting the focus of the trial to George Floyd's drug use, even suggesting that Floyd may have been faking a panic attack when he was confronted by Chauvin and other officers in the early moments of that incident. Again, not really surprising. The judge has put limits on how much testimony there can be about Floyd's past, because obviously George Floyd not on trial here. Derek Chauvin is. But it's very common for defense attorneys to try and make a case about the victim to sow seeds of doubt. So I think people should just be prepared that that's going to be sort of the focus of this trial for the next few days until closing arguments.
And a reminder again, as we watch the testimony and it feels like it's this open and shut case. You only need one juror to sort of say, I don't know, maybe Derek Chauvin was justified, and then you get a hung jury. So it is not so easy to convict anybody, for that matter, not even just a police officer. SNL did a great skit about this. I don't know if you saw it. They're cold open.
I heard it was funny. I need to go back and watch that. The other thing, Jill, just on Chauvin before we move on, manslaughter is one of the charges that he's, it's possible that he gets manslaughter, and that is not going to be enough for a lot of people. If there's not the word murder in a conviction, that's going to be a big problem in terms of unrest, protests, riots, etc.
Switching gears, we just wanted to get on the record with this. California ready to burn, literally. The state bracing for another extreme wildfire season this year after 2020 made history. More than 90% of California is in a drought. The rainy season of winter just didn't bring much in the way of relief. Researchers are finding that the fuel moisture content in the hills and the mountains is extremely low, meaning vegetation is parched and primed to ignite. Ugh.
Yeah, it's right. Climate change, obviously, one of the reasons for this, making wildfire seasons longer every year. California budgeting $1 billion this year for wildfire prevention and preparedness efforts. Last year was a disaster, but it was actually made worse by that one freak lightning storm back in August that ignited all those fires, if you remember. So hopefully we don't get one of those freak accidents this year. It used to be the wildfire season didn't really get going until the end of summer. I remember when I was at NBC, we didn't really start worrying about coverage until August. But now it's really like late spring onward. It's sort of in the same way that hurricane season now kind of starts in July, right? It used to be August, September.
On to some business news. I guess this falls under the business news bracket. American consumers appear to have finally stopped hoarding toilet paper. Sales of toilet paper were down 33% in the first quarter from a year ago, according to the market research firm Nielsen IQ. Paper towels and wet wipe sales also down double digits. All the big consumer staple companies, Clorox, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, back to somewhat normal when it comes to production.
Yeah, maybe that's a little good sign that we're turning the corner here. There were these beliefs that there were going to be these big supply chain issues hitting toilet paper and other consumer staples, that just because they've been hitting everything else. So it doesn't seem like that's happening, which is, knock on wood, pretty good. Plenty of toilet tissue to go around on store shelves. I think mostly just because people are still working through their stockpiles, right? I mean, I think we still are. We're still working with, right?
You don't even want to look in my garage right now.
It's funny to think back at last year, right? Because toilet paper, it became sort of like the talisman for all of our early pandemic anxieties. I mean, Jill, I remember I remember the first time I really had this like sense of being like, oh my God, we're screwed, was when I was in the grocery store last March, and I was looking around and I was like, where is everything? Why are the shelves all bare? Man, this is going to be bad.
Yeah, and that does that does instill a sense of panic, for sure. I feel like you were stoking the second toilet paper shortage, Carlo. You were like really on that beat, especially last week, to the point where I was rechecking our garage to make sure we had enough toilet paper.
Yeah, I'm trying to pump Procter & Gamble stock over here.
The ride-hailing startup Grab, a Southeast Asian super app, it's basically Uber on steroids, is merging with a special purpose acquisition company to go public in the U.S. at $40 billion valuation. That would make it the largest SPAC deal yet. It's a sign that the SPAC boom, in which companies bypass the traditional IPO process to list shares, not losing steam. Grab's going to be listing on the NASDAQ when that deal is completed.
Also, a big IPO today. Coinbase going public today. It's going to be an absolute monster. Big deal in the crypto world. It's sort of like going to be one of these things that legitimizes that space further in terms of regular investors. Nobody really knows how this company is valued. The latest private valuation had it at $100 billion, which would make it like one of the most valuable companies in America. I'm not even exactly sure what it does. It's like a platform for trading crypto. And its value mostly tied to the price of Bitcoin, which just, by the way, hit an all-time high once again. So if you want to get some crypto exposure without actually buying Bitcoin, I think Coinbase stock would be the way to do it, though I'm not obviously advising that because I'm not a financial advisor.
Netflix clearly not too worried about all of the calls to boycott season 2 of Bridgerton after it was announced that Regé-Jean Page would not be returning to the show. With production underway on the second season of this hit period romance, Netflix has greenlit seasons 3 and 4 based on the third and fourth books in the series. There are 8 books in all.
I meant to ask you this last week because you're a Bridgerton fan. What happened? Why did that guy leave? Page. He was like the star, wasn't he?
So yes, he was. And I am woman enough to admit that Regé-Jean
He's a tall drink of water.
Was the reason that I've watched the show like 25 times, start to finish. Yes. I didn't know anything about the show so he's not the reason I watched it in the first place, but he is the reason I kept coming back for more. I was, along with so many others, definitely heartbroken when I heard he would not come back. So apparently the backstory here is that this was the plan all along. The show is based on Julia Quinn's book series. Each book is based, as I was mentioning, on a different member of the Bridgerton family. So the first one was about Daphne and her love interest, the Duke. The Duke is played by Regé-Jean. And the story, in many ways, it kind of was a complete story. It had a beginning, middle, and an end. The second season is going to be based on the second book in the series, which centers around Daphne's older brother, Anthony. The actress who plays Daphne, she's going to be back, though. She's coming back, unlike Regé-Jean. She's going to have a lesser role. I'm still holding out hope that maybe he'll come back for seasons 3 or 4. You know, now that we know that, because he's still, they're not like writing off his character. They're going to be mentioning him. He's just not going to appear. But oh my gosh, he's like, he just was so integral into this show. I'll leave it there.
Becky says the same thing. You said you're a woman enough. Look, I'm man enough to admit that guy is a tall drink of water. Happy to admit that.
And it's, I do feel a sadness because like you're so rooting for him as well, in just in terms of his character, because of what he's been through. Anywho, okay, we're gonna leave it there. Maybe I'll go home today and watch a little Bridgerton if I have time. All right, that's what you need to know for Wednesday, April 14th.
See you guys tomorrow.